Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is looking at narcissism in parents who are fire signs. I'm doing this series after having done narcissism in general. I did group them with the elements first, and then I did like each sign individually. I'm going to group them in elements again because it makes it short, like a shorter video for each set of videos, and I want to talk about general things related to fire before I go into the specific signs themselves, which are Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. Just for full disclosure, I am a sun in Sagittarius, so not to say that I am going to be biased, because I would like to think that I'm very objective, but if I kind of separates Sagittarius from the other two fire signs, I will explain why it is, but it isn't because I am favoring Sag, being one myself. So I just wanted to explore what the fire element is all about before I talk about narcissism, because it's pretty important. The fire element deals with creativity. You could say creative self-expression, but it's all about the individual. And this is why fire signs tend to really want freedom. They really want the freedom of expression, the freedom to live life on their own terms. And this makes fire signs very tuned into themselves. To an outsider, fire signs may seem a bit self-absorbed, or full of themselves. And that's totally true, because that's what fire signs are specializing in themselves. And that's what creativity really is about. When you are expressing your essence to the masses, and that essence is individualistic. People tend to look down on artists that are derivative, who are copying other people. They want to see originality, because that's who you are versus somebody else. So this is why I think that those of us who are fire signs are seen as arrogant or self-absorbed. And there is like a grain of truth in it, but it could be distorted, where sometimes somebody who appears confident or like they really know themselves is pegged by other people as being arrogant. And whereas other people, they may not really know what they think about something, not really formulate any kind of point of view on things, and maybe they're more easily influenced by other people's opinions, and yet anything can be taken to the extreme. And this is where the narcissist comes in. I'm not trained in psychology, so I can't talk about official definitions of narcissism. I know that narcissism is on a spectrum, and what I am referring to here is, in particular, the more extreme versions that are toxic to the person themselves and to other people. So it's not going to be the mild person who talks a little bit too much about themselves, but is generally a decent person. They're caring about others. No, true narcissists actually lack empathy. And this is what is so dangerous about them, because in a person who may sometimes be hurt and then they lash out at others because they're hurt, but then they regret it, they feel guilty about it. A narcissist will do it and not feel a thing because they don't have that empathy. Well, that's like not having a conscience, really. And that, when we talk about psychopaths, sociopaths, that's at the top of the list, or the highest version of a narcissist. But there are two types of narcissists. There are the malicious narcissists and the covert narcissists. The malicious ones are the ones who are deliberately trying to provoke other people into negative states, and they feed off of that negative energy. You could call them energy vampires. And they call this negative energy that they are generating within other people as supply. So a malignant narcissist will get that supply from maybe saying, just deliberately cruel things to people just to see their reaction. And then they love it. When a person gets upset, when they try to defend themselves, and the narcissist knows that they have been triggered, they absolutely love it. The covert narcissist is somebody who is trying to be the center of attention, trying to always be getting attention from others or sympathy, because they're presenting themselves as an eternal victim. I don't think that a lot of fire signs would fall into this category who are narcissists. And by the way, before I continue, all of these things where I'm talking about the element of fire or the individual signs, these are archetypes, meaning that they have certain traits that go along with that, but it doesn't mean that every person who has these traits are going to that everybody of these signs or of these elements are going to possess these traits. So you don't even have to tell me that. I know that very well. I know that with astrology, there are so many other factors that can modify these influences, but they are part of that template for each sign, the characteristics. And for some of these extreme personalities, they will tick a lot of those boxes. And we're also looking at the challenging or the shadow side, you could say the negative traits of that particular sign, because we're talking about narcissism. We're not talking about something good. So obviously, I'm going to be focusing on the negative traits or the shadow side of each sign. So let's talk about Aries. Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. It's ruled by Mars. Aries people Aries in general is a sign that can be very competitive. But when an Aries person is balanced, they can be competitive, but it could be more on the healthier side of things, where they go into a kind of a career where competition is part of it, like for instance being an athlete. And even when they lose, they still are motivated in the future to win. They're not like, it doesn't like chip away at their self-esteem to lose. Well, I mean, they're human. That might bother them to some degree, but it motivates them to do better. The narcissistic Aries person who is competitive is doing so in order to destroy their competition. So it is a very toxic thing that they're doing. Aries, being the first sign of the zodiac, is all about being number one. Now, again, a balanced individual who has the the sun in Aries is going to know that they can't necessarily be number one everywhere they go. But the one who is insecure, with narcissism on the more extreme side, it's not just that they're insecure. Really, narcissists are, very broken people. There is trauma in their background of one way, shape, or form. So they don't even know that they are this broken, and they're just going after things in order to prove that they are the best. This is, classic narcissism, because it doesn't matter who they walk all over to get there. So when a person like this has children, they want their children to be number one. And one of the things that they will do is they will go to the school. If their child gets an A minus or a B, or God forbid a C, D, or F, and they will chew the teacher out, rip them a new one, because, how dare they do that to their child. So one thing about the fire signs is the ego is really front and center. Now, there's a healthy ego and there's a narcissistic, toxic ego. The healthy ego is just celebrating the self, being proud of one's achievements. There's nothing wrong with that as long as the person isn't using that as a way to look down on other people. The Aries person who is a narcissist, a malignant narcissist, if they feel that they are not successful, they are going to be very dangerous to be around, typically. Again, if they are broken from past abuse, some kind of horrible situation that occurred, traumatic situation. But I'm not saying that all Aries people who have suffered trauma are narcissists. I want to make that very clear. And some of them are not going to necessarily be successful in the eyes of the world, and they still will not, do what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the ones that are broken, that don't know, they're disconnected from themselves. They're disconnected from their higher self. And so they're going through life trying to, what do they call it? Like, do one-upmanship with other people. And that is that toxic competition. And so the woman who is an Aries person who fits this bill, it might be her looks. Like, she has to be the most beautiful woman. If she's not being given that attention in that setting, she may do something really rude, really nasty to try to cut that person down to size. So envy, jealousy is a big part of this as well, where the person is competitive, but if they're not the one that's in the driver's seat, they can do destructive things to try to bring down the other person that has more achievements or praise or whatever. So as far as children are concerned, they are going to impart this onto their children, this idea about competition. Now, they're going to be probably hard on their children. They want their children to succeed at any cost. But narcissists in general want their children to make them look good. So you can see it in so many different varieties. Like their children have to be on the honor roll. Their children have to be in sports. I think in this case, with Aries, this could be particularly true of the parent who almost like forces their children to get into sports so that they can live vicariously through the child and through their competitions. And, they might push the child to be a good athlete. Um, Unfortunately, I've seen this with other people as well. That it's not going to be limited to Aries, but just Aries is so competitive that it just dovetails really perfectly with the toxic Aries individual. And that could put a lot of pressure on a child. If you are the child of an Aries and you experience this, you probably felt like a lot of pressure. Maybe it was in sports, and sometimes in sports, the Aries parent becomes a coach. Like, especially, I mean, I don't know that there are many female coaches. It's usually the father, and all the cardinal signs can be coaches because cardinal signs they tend to gravitate towards positions of authority, and then Leo too can be like the leader. But the cardinal signs are Aries, Libra, Cancer, Capricorn. So, this can make the adult, the parent, Aries person very immature because they have a very low threshold to tolerate any kind of frustration. And I think a lot of the hot-headedness of Aries, which Aries is associated with that in general, and it's because Mars can be our anger, and it is so immediate that it's like the person who is very easily is very triggerable, who flies off the handle perhaps. And this kind of behavior can be very intimidating for the child of an Aries. They can feel like they can feel kind of unsafe, even if it's just screaming and it's not hitting or anything like that. It can still feel like they're trying to avoid inciting the wrath of that parent, and so maybe the child complies initially, but when the child becomes old enough where they start to see through this tyrannical parent, this bully, that is the unfortunate thing about the Aries narc, is that they can be a bully, that the child can rebel, especially if they are a fire sign or an air sign. The air signs are Gemini, Libra, Aquarius, because they're masculine signs and they tend to, project their energy outward and be a lot more assertive than the earth and water signs. So that can spell trouble for this type of parent who may begin to lose their sway when the child becomes a teenager, and then it's on, because it's like they talk about unmasking a narcissist. And when the child gets old enough to realize what a bully their parent is, they don't have respect for that parent. They don't believe, they realize it's all intimidation. And it reminds me of this movie. I don't think that I actually saw the movie, but there was like one great scene. I think it was with Robert Duvall. It was called The Great Santini. And I don't know if he was a coach. He might have been a father and a coach, but it was like there was a scene where he was like, I think with his son, and he was like really yelling at him for not being, I think they were playing basketball or something. He was just really coming down on him. And it's like that bullying parent type of a dynamic. And that is the essence of this type of narcissist. How do you deal with such a person? Well, it's hard to say, because in some cases, if that person is so far gone, they will not compromise. And truly full level narcissists, they don't compromise. I will say sometimes they do, but it's fake. Sometimes they pretend, especially if you separate yourself from them. They will put on an act, and they will act like they have changed, and then they will go right back where they were. So ultimately, a person, an adult child, has to decide how they're going to handle this. If a person is really full blown, some people go no contact. They realize that they can't have a normal relationship with this individual, and it's too dangerous psychologically to do so. So um I'm really not here to, offer suggestions necessarily, but just to point out that there are different levels of narcissism, and therefore it can, be more tolerable maybe if it's on the lower end of the spectrum and it's easier to manage. But at a certain point, the person who's being affected by it may be like, no, thank you. Okay, let's talk about Leo. Leo is a fixed fire sign, and it's ruled by the sun. So Leo people can be very creative, and they can be like a natural leader and be very warm-hearted and generous. When they are narcissists, it's kind of like Aries. They can be the petty tyrant, the haughty person who thinks they're better than others. Now, speaking on that, Leos in general are seen as narcissistic. And you will see this over and over again, because Leo people, maybe because they're ruled by the sun, they are very aware of their talents, and they don't mind telling everybody about them or their achievements. And this is because the sun, when we talk about our astrological influences, the sun is front and center, just like it is, for us as human beings on planet Earth. And the sun represents our aspirations, how we came to shine a light in this world. And so when a Leo person achieves something, it's just like when a little kid achieves something and they go and they tell their parents, or they tell anybody who will listen. They might tell strangers, I did this, I did that. Um, it's interesting because Donald Trump is not a sun in Leo, but he has Mars in Leo, and he has Leo ascendant. And so the ascendant can really give people a certain impression about you based on the way that you're presenting yourself. And so he often gets accused of this. But in his defense, and in defense of people who are fire signs, I would say that there is this, it's like the inner child, and that's actually what the fifth house that Leo represents in astrology is about, the inner child. And this is a lot, and also just the actual children. Leos and all fire signs can have that inner child alive and well within themselves. But with the narcissist, this has been killed off by trauma, by some sort of, and it doesn't, I mean, even like a lot of financial restrictions, especially for a sign like Leo that loves abundance, living large, and things like that, that can be especially traumatic to such a sign, you know. So for those types of people, it can be a wounding of pride. And this is the narcissist feels like their basic, core self has been destroyed. But, abuse can certainly do that to a person. And there's a deep self-loathing within malignant narcissists. And that's what makes them so dangerous, because they hate themselves so much, they have to project their inner hatred onto other people, and it's very destructive to those other people. With Leo, it's done by presenting themselves as better than others. And because Leo people may be very talented and personable, I mean, no, I wouldn't say personable, but charismatic, they can really present the illusion that they are actually superior people and that they have a right to feel that way. But when we really understand our true nature, we know that no one who is balanced, is at peace with themselves, would do this kind of thing. And so how that affects the child is that the Leo person sees their child as an extension of their ego. If their child is not doing well academically, maybe he's very slow to learn, maybe he has an actual learning disability, the Leo parent may bully them because they feel the sense of shame. And they already have like deeply internalized shame. All malignant narcissists do. But this triggers it because it reminds them of their own deficits or imperfections. It can be extremely toxic to be around somebody who has a superiority complex and who tries to demean you. The terrible thing about it is that if such a parent is that way to their child because they feel like their child isn't measuring up, it just creates more insecurity within the child and less of a likelihood that that child will stick their neck out, try new things, attempt any kind of achievement because they don't want to fail. And that obviously can set up a situation where you have an adult child who is really feeling quite insecure about their abilities, thanks to this parent who wasn't supportive, was actually thwarting them in a lot of ways. And by the way, I would say, especially for, these two signs in particular, but this could be true of narcissists in general, is that they may be undermining their children. I'm not just, even going into adulthood, because they don't want their children to overtake them. you know, in success, in all of those things. As far as Sagittarius is concerned, the area that Sagittarius rules in the chart is ninth house, which is the God house. So I consider it organized religion versus the more free form type of spiritual exploration of the eighth and 12th houses. So this can, the Sagittarius in general, one of the traits that they say to watch out for is being moralistic, meaning preachy. Being moral is different than being moralistic. Being preachy means that you are constantly, maybe judging others for failing to do this or that, and that isn't right, that isn't, you know, moral or godly. And yet there might even be this kind of hypocrisy there. Being moral simply means that somebody is, living life within a certain set of, like, an ethical framework to work from. Because the ninth house is the house of philosophy. So it can be like, what is your philosophy of life? What do you think is the purpose of this life? What do you think is the meaning of this life? And so sometimes with Sagittarians, this can be that the Sagittarian belongs to a certain religion. Maybe they're even a fanatic in that religion. I could certainly see that. And they use religion to feel better than others, to feel more morally superior. They're the one that God is going to choose as a believer because they are following everything to the letter. They're just ticking off all the boxes of morality. But there can be, especially with Sag, one of the challenging aspects is being a hypocrite, preaching certain things that they are not willing, that they are not able to do for themselves. But they're there judging, admonishing people for not living up to the ethics or the whatever it is that they see as the meaning of life. Also, Sagittarius is about the truth. So people can use truth as a weapon. They can say something that is 100% accurate to another person, but incredibly hurtful, and they're really doing it for the purpose of wounding that individual. They're doing it with a vengeful spirit. And then when that person gets upset, they say, I'm only, telling the truth about this thing. And they're acting like they're being very straightforward. They're not being phony, but they're hiding behind that so-called truth to bash someone. Again, because just in general, a narcissist is wanting to get rid of their self-loathing. And also hiding behind religion as a way to condemn others, and then use some sort of passage in some holy book to justify their claims, to bolster their claims, when really they're just trying to cut people down to size so they can harvest off of the negative energy. If the also, well, one other area that there's a couple of other areas I want to bring up here. So Sag also rules academia. So you might have some Sagittarius who are atheists, and they, belong to the cult of higher education, and they use their academic credentials to control the narrative within the home, meaning that they may try to come across as know-it-all so that they forced, complete blind obedience to their opinions or their desires. And this is also true, by the way, of the religious kind of followers who demand that of their children. You know, children have their own minds and they have their own souls. So a child doesn't necessarily follow the belief patterns of their parents, their philosophical framework. You see it all the time, that an adult child, can very easily go in a completely opposite direction than their parents in terms of what their parents chose as their life. The children may choose another life, another path. And so God can be used to bolster the narcissist for a Sagittarius narcissist. If the Sagittarius is actually some kind of a spiritual, I wouldn't, it could be a teacher, but, like a pastor or that kind of thing, where there is some sort of following of this individual, they will want their children to reflect them as this perfect servant of God. So if the child does anything to embarrass the parent, which can include even the misbehavior, the leader, who happens to be a narcissist, may be very irate about this. And the other thing to keep in mind is that since this is this rules the house, Sagittarius rules the house of foreign travel, there is this connection with broad-mindedness. But even broad-mindedness can be turned into some kind of, narcissistic tendency to, like, say, I'm more tolerant than other people. And yet, the irony is that they're not. They're not tolerant of people who are different than them, but they use that as a way for self-aggrandizement. And that's what you see with, I would say, especially the fire signs, is self-aggrandizement as it pertains to, aren't I open-minded and tolerant? And, pretty much gaslighting people for having any objections to whatever that person's issue is. Okay, that's what I have on the fire signs and narcissism. I hope that you enjoyed this. Thanks for listening. Take care. Bye.